All right. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Randy Parraz for making the time to speak to the community. I've heard his story once, and all he has to share. Absolutely phenomenal. So much to learn. And before we get started, I will give you all a quick rundown of his bio, and then we'll get to hear from him. So. Randy Parraz is an organizer, social entrepreneur, author, founder of various social justice organizations, and currently co-founder and president of the Organizing Institute for Democracy. Prior to that, Randy served as the executive director of the Arizona Education Association, where he spearheaded a new approach to building power that catapulted AEA to number one in the country for membership growth. Randy has spent the past 29 years engaged in the work of building power and moving people into action. Randy's introduction to social justice began when he observed his father, Deputy Sheriff John Parras, organize the Latino Peace Officers Association in the 1970s to combat discrimination in the recruitment, hiring, and retention of Latino officers. Randy's understanding of organizing and framework for building power has been heavily influenced by Ernie Cortez of the Industrial Areas Foundation and Marshall Gans, a former United Farm Workers organizer who worked closely with Cesar Chavez for 16 years. While pursuing his master's in public administration at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, Randy took courses on organizing from both Cortez and Gans, from church-based organizing in East Dallas to national coalition building on behalf of 20,000 strawberry workers in the fields of California to working as a national field representative of the AFL-CIO. Randy has experience with many methods of social change. As an Echoing Green recipient, Randy and his co-founder, Scott Sherman, established the Transformative Action Institute to inspire, train, and develop a new generation of visionaries on college campuses. Randy has taught courses on social change at UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Irvine, Arizona State University, and Cal State Fullerton. In 2008, Randy moved to Arizona and joined a labor campaign to build political support for immigrant workers in the housing industry. As the campaign progressed, workers, many of whom were undocumented, began to complain about the worksite raids, harassment, and mistreatment of Sheriff Arpaio. Randy developed a new strategic approach of applying pressure on the board of supervisors to hold Arpaio accountable for his corrupt behavior. Randy's role of organizing actions and protests to expose Arpaio's racist and abusive practices caused him to be labeled high profile and eventually targeted and arrested by sheriff deputies. In January of 2011, Randy co-founded Citizens for a Better Arizona and spearheaded a grassroots campaign to recall the most powerful politician in the state of Arizona, Senate President Russell Pierce, author of SB 1070, the Show Me Your Papers anti-immigrant legislation. In November of 2011, Citizens for a Better Arizona made history by recalling and removing the first president of the Senate from office. In February 2014, Randy returned to the National AFL-CIO to serve as the Governance and Organizational Leadership Development Coordinator for the Western region of the country. Randy spent considerable time with central labor councils, state federations, and affiliates to identify, train, and develop leaders to take on the work of transforming the labor movement to build power for workers and their families. 2 years later, Randy was recruited by the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union to lead their Making Change at Walmart campaign to develop and implement a national strategy of engaging Walmart workers and allies to expose Walmart's abuse, mistreatment, intimidation, and harassment of its workers. In July of 2018, Randy resigned from UFCW to begin the process of writing the story of the historic recall of Senate President Russell Pierce. Randy completed the final manuscript of Dignity by Fire, Dismantling Arizona's Anti-Immigrant Machine in the fall of 2021. I have that book. It is phenomenal. And Randy is a graduate of UC Berkeley, Berkeley Law, and the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Randy currently resides in Phoenix, Arizona with his partner Lilia and their son Lionel. I have heard Randy speak. This is incredible. Everyone, you should all be ready for a great Zoom. Randy, the stage is yours. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, Isaac, thank you very much for that introduction. That's rather long. Hope you guys had to sit through that. But it's exciting to be here with you all. And again, I really appreciate this opportunity to share the story of what happened in Arizona. And unfortunately, now you're seeing it play out the national stage. And so when we were going through this in Arizona, people who had lived outside Arizona were kind of laughing at us and, oh, how can you let these things happen in Arizona? And unfortunately, the pain and suffering we experience in abuse of power is now taking place under the Trump administration. So I want to kind of get into the story here and share some of the similarities, but also explain how does this happen, what we did in Arizona to make change happen. So the title of the book is Dignity by Fire. That came from a speech given by, or a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King, who talked about in the civil rights movement, there's a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. No matter what Bull Connor did in Birmingham to hose down and to turn the dogs loose on these demonstrators, the kids marched, they filled the jails, that there's a certain kind of fire in each and every one of us that no water can put out. And so that inspired me to title this Dignity by Fire, Dismantling Arizona's Anti-Immigrant Machine. Because after 2011, for the next decade or so, no anti-immigrant piece of legislation saw the light of day, and nothing ever occurred. And so I want to talk about this work, right? And so leading up to it, it just didn't happen overnight. I'm originally from California, much more progressive place. I came to Arizona and I was like, what's going on here? This was 2007, 2008. How is a sheriff able to do drive-by presentations? I'm sorry, Isaac, I'm trying to click. The slide is not moving. Let's see. Your screen sharing. Okay, let me see. I got to click that. Okay. Try it again. I don't know. What do you think, Isaac? Oh, there it goes. That changed. How could this be happening? Because back in those days, the sheriff would show up with his posse. They would show up with guns armed at a bakery, at a library, anywhere where there's undocumented immigrants who were cleaning the place up and baking, and they were doing these raids, right? And so people didn't understand that prior to that, this is what's happening in Arizona. I call it unchecked hate. In 2002, there was a bill that was put through by Russell Pierce, who's now a representative, calling on Arizona National Guard to control the border. Sound familiar what's going on in LA right now, right? There was a 2003, a voter ID bill requiring proof of citizenship for voters, right, when they went to the polls. In 2004, there's a bill to deny undocumented students, right, known as DACA, the ability to be classified as in-state students to make it harder for them to be educated, right? And then from 2004 to 07, there are statewide initiatives being passed, right? One was to require a voter ID to cast a ballot, make English the official language, right? And the reason why they're doing statewide initiatives is because at that time there was a Democratic governor who could have vetoed these things. So they just bypassed the governor and went right to the voters, right? They banned in-state tuition and financial aid for undocumented college students, right? And they prohibited businesses from hiring undocumented workers, right? All this atmosphere is happening for the first decade of the 2000s. And in 2010, they even went after affirmative action, and all these things passed overwhelmingly, right? The voters, oh yeah, that sounds good, let's do that. So they banned affirmative action, right? And so the final piece after all that was going on was to really target the undocumented immigrant community. And Russell Pierce went and passed this bill called SB 1070, which we basically said, show me your papers, which gave law enforcement the power if there was anyone they saw that was reasonably suspicious, they could pull them over, detain them, arrest them, and then deport them, right? And so when this happened, people didn't stay quiet, right? There was all sorts of reactions to it. This is an example of it, right? People protested, we marched, some people got arrested, there was civil disobedience, right? And so you probably heard that scene, the people united will never be defeated. You probably heard the thing in Spanish, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido, like the people united. But what happened is that, the real thing is like the people united, they sometimes win and sometimes lose, right? Because we did all this marching, we called for national boycott, we're in the streets, and we lost. Because Russell Pierce, the person that authored this thing in 2010, not only did he get reelected, he then became president of the Senate. So my response to what happened in 2010, I decided to run as a protest candidate for U.S. Senate. And of course, I lost, right? We lost everything. And this gentleman, Russell Pierce, he became reelected. He's from a very red district in Mesa, which is founded by the Mormons, the Church of Latter-day Saints. He was easily reelected. And then they decided to someone who's very racist, he became one of the most powerful politicians because SB 1070, to elevate him to be president of the Senate. When that occurred, that shook something in me, right? Because he no longer was a senator from Mesa. He now was president of the Senate and controlled the agenda for the whole state of Arizona. And so I call this kind of a threshold for injustice moment. We all have those inside of us. It's that moment when something hits a point where you no longer can stay silent and inactive. It triggers you to do something. And so when I heard that he became president of the Senate, the first thing that came to my mind, and it was crazy, was recall, right? And so I started researching recall. Fortunately, Arizona was one of maybe 23 states in the whole country that has the recall provision. which basically means that if you gather enough signatures, you can force the person to run again, right? The signatures themselves do not recall them and kick them out. You recall them, and the governor has to call a special election. So I started researching that, and I realized that in that district, although it was a very red Republican district, we only needed 7,757 signatures to recall because there were over 40,000 Democrats and independents, right? So it's just my strategic organizing mind was going, right? So I thought I discovered something really powerful. So I'm like, all right, let me go talk to my friends, right? Get them excited about recalling Russell Pierce, right? So what do you think they said to me when I presented this idea and showed them how we could win? And that, although we'd have to elect another Republican, right? Because we can't run a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. But the strategy said we recall him, we find a moderate Republican, we run them, split the Republican vote. Because back then there were Republicans that were pro-immigrant reform, right? So that was a strategy. And what do you think people said to me? Can people kind of raise their hand and respond? What do you think they told me? What do you think they were excited? My Democrat progressive friends, when I talked to them about this, what do you think they said? What do y'all think they said? Isaac, can they respond?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
They unmute.
Is there anyone that wants to take a guess at some of the things they said to me?
Hi, this is Alan, and from the way you set this up, they turned you down.
Yeah, what do you think they said though? They didn't just turn me. What do you think they said?
Um, I don't know if they would have said that it's something that they just don't want to put their name on, that they don't want to get involved in the community that way, that they had certain fears.
There you go. Fear. Yeah. They were scared. It had never been done before, right? The first thing they said, you're crazy. I was now the crazy one, right, to come up with this idea. And I said, but it's in the Constitution. It's legal. It's allowed. No, you're crazy. And the second thing they said, when you lose, but when you lose, man, then they're going to come after us even more so, right? And the third thing they said is, you don't got a candidate. And no Republican will dare challenge one of the most powerful politicians in Mesa. So that's what I was told, right? I was now the crazy one. It would never happen, and we were going to lose. All right, so let me move on. Again, this thing is giving me problems. Okay, so what I had to do, because I was a Latino, left-wing, progressive Democrat, I had to build a coalition. And so I needed somebody to spearhead the recall movement, right? So it couldn't be me. They were going to come after me regardless, but I needed someone else. This gentleman's name is Chad Snow. Chad Snow was someone who I met, a quick story, in 2008. Chad Snow was Mormon, a white guy, owned his own business. He was a lawyer. And he was pro-immigration reform, and he did not like Russell Pierce's politics, right? So he was the right guy I needed to spearhead, to be my spokesperson, our leader. Chad Snow and I met in jail in 2008. In 2008, I was arrested by Sheriff Arpaio for protesting him, what they were doing on these raids. And we're at a board of supervisors meeting, we ended up shutting it down, right? And Chad Snow on his own was there with his, he had never protested anything. He was sitting in the audience watching this because he did workers' comp. And a lot of his clients were immigrants, right? So he didn't like what was happening to the immigrant families, right? He had a very good heart. And so when we protested and the meeting was shut down, Chad Snow stood up and they pointed at him and they pulled him aside and they handcuffed Chad Snow and took him in the hallway. So Chad Snow never protested, was freaking out, like, why is he being arrested, right? At that very same time, I had been arrested outside and they brought me back in the board supervisor, and I passed Chad Snow. And at that time, they said, oh, that's not him. Let Chad go, right? So they thought Chad Snow was me. So I still didn't know Chad Snow. So I go to later that night, I'm in jail. They move me around. They say, hey, you're high profile and all this stuff. I go to court and the judge says, hey, your lawyer's in the back. You should talk to him. I was like, I'm sorry, Judge, I don't have a lawyer. They said, yes, you do. He's in the back. So I go to the back room and I walk in. That's the first time I met Chad Snow. And he said, Randy, I want you to know I was there today when this went down. And they pulled me aside and they arrested me because they thought I was you. And so because of what took place, we're going to represent you pro bono, because they brought charges against me, right, for violating disorderly conduct, disrupting the peace, all this stuff, which would have cost me upwards of $30,000 to clear my name. He decided he'd do it pro bono. And I was walking out, he was kind of upset. I go, why are you so upset? He goes, I can't believe they mistook me for you because I'm so much better looking than you, right? So that was my first meeting of Chad Snow, right? So he was someone key that I needed to make this happen. Just a side, Chad recently in 2021, he passed away from cancer, but he was a key figure in the whole recall movement. He's one of our heroes, right? So we start moving forward. I got enough people to kind of say, hey, even though we don't think you're going to lose, Randy, we want to be part of this. No one else is doing anything. They're waiting for the next election. We need to move on this now. So they were helping out. I got 10 people donate $1,000. So we launched a paid circulation operation, and we launched a volunteer operation. So we start moving forward, right? So this is us making an announcement the first day of the Capitol session in 2011, say, hey, look, Russell Pierce, if you don't tone down your stuff, we're going to come after you. You better, we're going to watch you. So of course, he didn't do that. He continued to push all the anti-immigrant rhetoric again. And so we had to move forward with the recall. So we had to recruit someone. This was someone who lived in the district. I didn't live in the district. I was in Scottsdale. This has happened in Mesa. We got this gentleman, Mr. Selleck, and his family to put his name on it. It was a big deal because of all the fear and intimidation, but he was willing to put it. This was a maintenance worker at our golf course that decided to, hey, I'm going to stand up against this and I'm going to put my name to this. So we launched the recall, right? And we intentionally started recruiting older white people. I needed older white people to be the face of this. I didn't want them to be the angry Latino activists out there doing this. So we intentionally, you can see here, this woman in the far down the lower end, her name was Mary Lou Betcher. She was an Eisenhower Republican, the woman with the shades sitting in the lower corner. And she was the first one to give me a check for $30 to former educator to go after Russell Pierce. She lived about 2 blocks from him. She couldn't stand his politics, right? So it was that type of organizing that was able to get us moving on this whole thing. So as we're moving forward, right, what I want to let people know, when you recall the president of the Senate, as you're collecting signatures, he's still the president of the Senate. And so initially he kind of ignored us, kind of laughed and mocked us, right? But didn't really pay us much mind because he had a bigger agenda. So as we're out there collecting signatures, we had 120 days. He's still at work going after immigrants. And so I call this SB 1070 supersize. So as we're knocking on doors, right, collecting signatures, he's putting this through. And so one thing I want to share with you about when you start taking on daring and bold and huge causes, you find out things you don't know, right? And so because of SB 1070, no, it was a CNN covered it, all the national news covered it. It was a big story. When I was talking to people about recalling Russell Pierce, they said, you can't do it. Everyone knows him. He's been a politician for 20 years. He's never lost an election, right? And so when we tested this out, we went knocking on doors before we launched the recall. This is a little side story. And we asked people one basic question, right? How do you feel about Russell Pierce being president of the Senate? This was in his district, right? Limited amount of households. We knocked on doors. And 2 out of 3 people said to us, who is Russell Pierce? Think about that. On the one hand, all the known pundits and political leaders say, everyone knows him. You can never take him on. And then in his district, 2 out of 3 people told us who was Russell Pierce. That gave me a tremendous amount of hope, right, to move forward because now we could define who he was. So I was able to get people to sign the recall petition without even talking about SB 1070 immigration. We could talk about his attack on teachers, his attack on workers, his attack against women. So it just opened us up, right? So some people who made it supported SB 1070 still signed the recall petition because we were able to tell who Russell Pierce was. So again, that's that note. So back to this story. So he passes 1070 in 2010, and now in 2011 he starts pushing. We call it supersized 1070, an omnibus immigration bill. Check out some of the things he wanted to put into it, and it resonates with what Trump's trying to do today and his boy, Stephen Miller. Deny entry to public schools to undocumented children, which is a right guaranteed under the Constitution, right? Require all public employees to report immigration violations to schools and hospitals. In other words, to create like this reporting system where people are becoming ICE agents. Bar undocumented immigrants from driving, and if they get caught, they got to serve jail time, right? Bar children, undocumented immigrant parents from public benefits, right? So if your parents undocumented and you're a citizen, you don't get those benefits. Bar undocumented immigrants from enrolling in state universities and community college, right? This is where he was taking Arizona. And then there was more, right? He didn't want to stop there. He wanted to, anyone convicted of identity theft, 180 days in jail, right? Require hospitals, check this out, to verify a patient's legal status before providing non-emergency care. Hey, I can't look at your arm right now until I find out what your status is. Deny vehicle registrations to undocumented residents, right? We'd rather you drive a car illegally than to register it. And check this out. You hear about birthright citizenship? Issue birth certificates only to babies with at least one parent who must be a U.S. citizen or green card holder, right? This is 2011 Arizona. So now we got 2025 President Trump. Evict all residents, even U.S. citizens, from public housing units if any undocumented person was found living there, right? So this was the hate and the legislation that was moving as we're out there knocking on doors, right? And so our goal, was to, I want to just ask a quick question. Why do you think he was doing this? Because fortunately, at that time, unlike right now, where all the Republicans are pretty much together, there was a minority of Republicans who weren't for this. So this legislation, he's president of the Senate, but he put it on the floor for a vote and forced a vote, and he lost. Why do you think a president of the Senate would put that vote put that on the floor, knowing that he's going to lose, knowing that some of his Republican colleagues would vote against it? What do you think he was? Why would he do that? Why would he force that vote? Because he was playing chess, not checkers, and that's why the recall is such a historic event. Anyone want to take a guess? Put on your political cap. If no one's really jumped in, I'll just cut to it, because he wanted those Republicans on. Did anyone raise their hand? Okay. He wanted the moderate Republicans on record voting against the omnibus immigration bill, because in 2012 he was on a primary then. Because although Russell Pierce had the majority, he didn't have a Tea Party majority, which was a really extremist. He wanted to get to a supermajority Tea Party majority. He didn't have that in 2011. So he forced that vote to get them on record, then use that against them. So fortunately, he wasn't able to do that because we intervened. So this was, remember, we started the recall. So now we fast forward right here. You see Chad Snow and I in his office. This is 120 days later. This is the day for turn-in. And these are all the petitions we gathered, right? So how many petitions y'all think we gathered? As I'm going through, this is us in the lobby of the State Senate building. Look at the press involved. This is us. This is Mary Lou Betcher, the back of her head. Again, we had the older white woman, intentionally Republican, who lived in their district. Again, I didn't live in that district. She was the face of it. If you want to attack us, attack her. She's another Republican, no, not an extremist. So we were countering their messaging. So as I'm talking, anyone want to guess how many signatures that we turned in? So then I'll just keep showing about the story. So this is, again, I want to talk from strategy. We didn't want this to be looked as a protest. So what we did, we were at the Capitol, not to protest Russell Pierce, we were at the Capitol to do business. Look at how people are dressed. That was all intentional. A tie, a suit, professional, right? We were not there to act like we were some extremist group. We were there to do business, to follow the Constitution, to follow the law, which allows citizens to do a recall and to make change happen.
We're guessing you got 15,000 signatures. It's just a guess.
That's a good guess. We actually got more. So check it out. So this is, again, look at the visuals. We brought children in there. The two little girls at the bottom of my two daughters, those are Chad Snow's kids next to them, Mary Lou Betcher. Look at the emphasis on the type of folks we wanted to feature, right? That's the images going out. That's all intentional, what we want to do in terms of what the recall was about. It was about regular Arizonans, not, Russell Pierce being too extreme for Arizona. That was the purpose of this recall. And so then again, we had more, again, the children, we had a resolution to read what's taking place. And these are the signatures. We actually turned in over 18,000 signatures, right? The reason we did that, because obviously all signatures aren't going to be valid. And so out of that, we needed 7,757. We submitted close to 18,000, and then over 10,000 were actually valid, which then triggered, the recall. So this is, again, showing you just how big of an event this was in Arizona. Again, at no point in Arizona's over 100-year history, there had been recalls, but never been a successful recall. They've all failed, and here we were taking on one of the most powerful politicians, and on the verge of issuing a recall, right? And so I just want to pause there for a moment. Think about that, like the very person that passed SB 1070, the very governor that signed SB 1070, right, that got her to be governor of Arizona, was now forced, because of citizens' work, citizens' democracy, citizens doing these initiatives, was forced to call a special election to force her ally and friend Russell Pierce to run for office again. Think how powerful that is, that as citizens, not as elected leaders, not as business leaders, but as citizens, we were able to call a special election in that district to force him to run again. So like I said before, one of the reasons why I couldn't lead this, because I knew they were going to attack me. So the moment we successfully recalled him, this came out, right? These posters are 4 feet high by 8 feet wide. There were over 300 of them, and they put them all over Mesa, right? And so it says basically, myself and my recall candidates, we oppose the rule of law, support open borders, and are supported by labor unions who boycotted Arizona, right? And then the fine print, which they put in there, which is hilarious because you can't even read the fine print when you walk by it. They call me a liberal extremist and community organizer, right? think about the title, right? They're coming at me thinking that that's going to work, right? So they put me front and center on what was happening. So that was their response. So then when they said, there's no one, even if you got the signatures rate, no one would want to run. We actually were fortunate enough that I was contacted by a leader in the LDS Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and say, hey, Randy, tell me more about your strategy because we think we can help you. But if you're going to run a Democrat, we're not going to do anything because there's no chance we can win. Because there's a good minority of us who can't stand Russell Pierce, but the moment a Democrat runs, there's no way we're going to get in the race. So I told them from the beginning, my goal was to keep the Democrats out and to get everyone behind a Republican candidate who was male, LDS, and hopefully was pro-immigration reform, then we can make it happen. So luckily for us, that gentleman's name was Jerry Lewis, and the older people know that Jerry Lewis is a good name ID for us. Who understand who that was, a comedian, kind of put a smile on his face. But so Jerry Lewis, stepped up. He worked in education. He was bilingual. He spoke Spanish. He loved immigrants, and he was willing to put his name out there and risk, running for office. And he had never ran for office before. We called him. It looked like George Clooney's brother. So it was easy on the eyes and able to go forward. I put this photo in here because it shows you how much Russell. There's some politicians that play the anti-immigrant card for political reasons. Russell Pierce hated immigrants. From how he grew up, he hated immigrants. This is his license plate. He was so proud of SB 1070, which was the most hateful piece of legislation. He put it on his truck license plate, 1070, to show that this is what he was proud about. So now we shift. Just real quick recap. We had 120 days to get the signatures. We submitted the signatures, then had to verify them. Finally, the governor called a special election. Just so you know, during that whole time, he's still in office. He's been recalled, doesn't mean he's been removed. So now we have to defeat him in a special election, right? So then we ramp up our effort, right? We start going out, picking up all these ballots, start recruiting a whole team of people to go out door to door to create a movement, right? We had such a good machine. We would call people up and say, hey, we want to pick up your ballot. They would put them on the doors and we would target these things and we go after them and we pick them up. And this is Dan O'Neill. Just so Dan O'Neill is part of Progressive Democrats of Arizona, one of the most leftist persons out there, atheist, progressive. And he was out there knocking on doors, not just to get Jerry Lewis elected, but it was an anti-Pierce campaign. We had people sitting in the same phone bank that were right-wing, they're very conservative Mormon grandmothers making phone calls next to Dan O'Neill, who was this atheist, progressive person, because it was all about creating a better Arizona. People could put their religion and parties aside because it's about creating a better Arizona. And our group was called Citizens for a Better Arizona. So again, this is a good example how people can work together to make change happen. But it also shows this is what you got to do when the system breaks down. The business community broke down. The elected officials broke down. To a situation, we had someone like Russell Pierce, who should never be put in that position, running the state of Arizona. So this is one of their Hail Marys. This is the last thing they did. We call it What a Sham, Olivia Cortez. In the Mormon church, they have these things called stakes, and they have things called wards. Wards are like small community groupings where they go and they worship, right? Olivia Cortez was in Russell Pierce's ward and was a friend of Russell Pierce. Russell Pierce's friend at the Tea Party recruited Olivia Cortez to run to split and confuse people to take votes away from Jerry Lewis because now they're worried. They're paying attention. They're worried about whether he's going to win. So we were able to then get our lawyers, take her to court. This is her on the stand asking questions like this. Olivia Cortez, who set up your website? I don't know. Who put up your signs? I don't know. Who did this for you? I don't know. So we have totally embarrassed her. Our goal was to get her off the ballot. And so unfortunately, we didn't succeed, but we totally discredited the campaign because on election day, she only got 8 votes. Only 8 votes on election because of the work that we did. So this was them using, a sham candidate to try and undermine us. So this gives you an extent. We call these garbage ballots because this is us knocking on doors, picking up people's ballots, telling them to vote for, Jerry Lewis to take down Russell Pierce. This shows how democracy works in terms of people making it happen, letting them know that their vote mattered so much that we wanted them to do it, because a lot of times people learn over time that their vote doesn't matter. And so we're asked saying, look, do it for me, make this thing happen. And on a side note too, that was 2011, because we were so successful. By 2016, they made this act of knocking on doors and picking up people's ballot a felony in Arizona now. Again, this shows our campaign. Behind them, you can see the wall. Those are all volunteers signing up for things to do, right? We created a movement. If you see our t-shirts, we made our t-shirts really simple. I said the first choice, Russell Pierce, we said mean guy. Olivia Cortez, we said withdrawn. And at the bottom it said Jerry Lewis, nice guy. So that was our rap at the door, right? It was not partisan. It was that simple. You want to vote for the mean guy, the nice guy, and the other person's is withdrawn. So let's make it happen. So this was election night. The results started coming in, right? I want to give you a sense of what took place. This is the people celebrating. Over 400 people came out. Look at some of the young people at the bottom. There's older people. There's multi-generational, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. It was one of the most diverse coalitions I had ever put together to build power and win in my career, because it took all of us, right? The Republicans couldn't do without us, and we couldn't do without the Republicans. It literally meant that we all had to come together to elect a person to take out Pierce. This is some of the older folks. The person on the left, the woman has her hand up. She's Latina. That was our oldest canvasser. She used to work with Cesar Chavez, United Farm Workers. Cecilia Arambula was 73 years old. She's still alive when we were knocking on doors, and she refused to take a check because we were able to start paying people to do it. She was out there, 73 years old, knocking on doors to take out Russell Pierce. And Jackie Adams is one of our African-American leaders. She's since passed. She was another big supporter. What happens is that as we moved forward, the Democratic Party was against us because they weren't in the business of electing a Republican. She worked at the Democratic Party. She said, man, I'm coming over here because I need to wash my soul and make sure this man gets knocked out, right? So we had a lot of Democrats who were volunteering as private citizens because the bylaws of the Democratic Party said you cannot do anything but work to elect Democrats. So that was a sticking point for some of them. So again, this is our lawyer. Because of when we filed the signatures, we were taken all the way to the Supreme Court. They said our signatures were invalid. We went to the Supreme Court. We had to get other funders to come on board. So this is, again, we started pouring the champagne. The votes came in. We were leading like 52-48. The first ballots came out. And so the place erupted. So that thing that we're very proud of as our movement is that we made, like, how do you tell an undocumented person when this is going down that they can still make change happen? So the recall and the vote allowed them to start knocking on doors, allowed them to reach out to people in the community. Some of these folks are teenagers, right, who came out and were part of, they were able to, the very person that was attacking them and their families for the last decade, now they were able to be part of a movement to remove Russell Pierce from office. That's how, imagine that feeling if you're 16-year-old and you're going to school and you're undocumented, seeing this person of hate attacking your families now being removed from office all in one night. So there's that sign against, they turned the sign into a liberation piece of artwork, right? So unbeknownst to me, one of our volunteers, she was a Mormon woman and she had never stolen anything in her life. And she said when she was coming back to celebrate, for the evening night of elections, she said she stopped. Those signs made her so upset. She stole a sign and brought it back. And unbeknownst to me, people started signing the sign to then present to me later that night. And then if you see on my forehead, it said, someone wrote, "Si se puede," right? Which means in Spanish, it can be done. So then this was a very, special moment for me to see all these, and I still have this sign. It just became such a piece of liberation to see them take that sign and turn it into something that was much more meaningful. So this was front page news the next day. Pierce on the verge of historic loss. This is in front of his house. One of the early signs we thought we knew we were going to win was that I was on Tuesday. The election was on Tuesday. On Monday, I was getting calls from reporters saying, "Hey, Randy, we see your celebration, your party, election night party is at the White House. We're going to be there. Can you tell us where Russell Pierce's party is going to be?" I said, well, if you're asking me, there ain't going to be no party. He didn't even have a place where they were going to be coming together. So this was him in front of his house. And just so you know, next to him is Sheriff Arpaio. Sheriff Arpaio, the one that was doing all the racist raids. Look at this tight-lipped thing that everywhere that when the two powerful politicians now being held accountable and Pierce being on the verge of losing. This was the following day, dethroned, right? That's us at the Capitol again. You see Chad Snow right behind me. You see Jerry Lewis down there where they kind of went in and talked more about the story, how this could happen, right? And the power of the story is that, unlike a regular election, let's say you get elected, you're like the Senate-elect, and then there's a couple months, and then you take office, right? The recall doesn't work that way. The moment you lose, you're done. Like you're done. And so the moment you win, you're in. So the next day, Jerry Lewis was not Senator-elect Lewis, he was State Senator Lewis, right? And so what they had to do next is they had to go down to the Capitol to elect the next president of the Senate, because now there's no president of the Senate. He's been dethroned, right? And I like that language because right now we're dealing with like a king type atmosphere. But here we were dealing with that with him. He was very vindictive, very mean, and people were scared of him, right? So just so you know what type of butt kicking we did on that night, the red precincts, these are all the precincts in Mesa, right? The red ones are the ones he won. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? All these other ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20, we won, right? That's how big of a campaign we did. He was only in the far east part of it. This is the butt whooping we did to make that happen. It shows you how people's movement can make stuff happen. And again, if you'd have asked people, is this possible 10 months prior, they have said, never would this ever happen. All right, where's my thing? So then this is us, after the recall, claiming the victory of the recall election, talking about what's taking place, us saying Pierce has to go, we're moving forward. And then we call this the one vote redemption. So again, Russell Pierce gets lost. And of course, he's like most powerful. He's got a lot of friends in the Senate, right? His buddies, his Tea Party guys. So Jerry Lewis goes in the next morning, right? He walks into a room with 21 senators. He's the 21st, and they have to elect a new president of the Senate. How do you all think the reception was when Jerry Lewis entered the room as the new president of Mesa and someone who dethroned Russell Pierce? How do you think they received him? His colleagues, what do you think they did? Come on, anybody, give me some feedback. What do you think they said?
Amy thinks that they should have applauded him.
Okay, what else? What do you think they did, though? What do you think? How was he received?
It's not pretty from the way you're presenting it.
Let me tell you this. The words mother effer was used at him. He was told that if you don't do this to one of our own, he was told not one piece of anything you draft will never move here. You should be ashamed of yourself. How could you do this to us? We don't do this. Who do you think you are? And to Jerry's credit, he sat there and went around and tried to shake people's hands. Some people wouldn't even shake his hand. And he sat there and he took it. And he stayed quiet. And then it came down to elect. And I don't know if you know this guy, you might have heard of him. His name is Andy Biggs. He's a congressman. Andy Biggs was running, he was a state, he wanted to be the president of the Senate. Andy Biggs loved Russell Pierce. Andy Biggs, he was running, and this guy, Steve Pierce, no relation to Russell, he also put his hat in the ring. So you had Steve Pierce and Andy Biggs going for U.S. Senate. I'm sorry, going for state Senate president, to be the president of the Senate. And unlike Russell Pierce, Steve Pierce grew up on a ranch in northern Prescott, northern Arizona, and they had day laborers on that ranch. And they saw them as part of their extended family. And they would invite them to Christmas dinner, right? So he had a different understanding about immigrants, right? So they went and they voted, right? And the vote was 11-10. And who do you think cast the 11th vote for Steve Pierce? Who was that 11th vote?
Jerry Lewis. Right?
And why did Jerry Lewis vote for Steve Pierce, not Andy Biggs? Because Steve Pierce, because of all the work that we did, because they saw what was going on, Steve Pierce says, if you vote for me, Jerry, I will put every piece of anti-immigrant legislation into the drawer, never to see the light of day. Imagine that. So, of course, he got elected to, right? And the recall was so powerful that in 2013, I want to show that Andy Biggs did become president of the Senate. Do you think Andy Biggs passed any anti-immigrant legislation? Not a single piece, because they didn't want to deal with what could happen. And so that was the power of what took place, right? Under this thing happened with one vote, we were able to reset the whole anti-immigrant agenda in Arizona and basically shut down the anti-immigrant machine for over a decade, right? They're never able to put that out there again. So then this is some artwork that came out. This is Russell Pierce being pulled over by these are the people, right? This is Sheriff Arpaio shaking. This is Governor Brewer shaking her boots, like who was next? This is kind of what's going on. This is what they did to me in terms of, celebrating the work we did. We took off, the head of the person. Just a side note, when the New Times told me they were going to feature this, they sent me artwork that had Russell Pierce's head, bleeding head with his eyes dropped. And I had gotten death threats. I had 2 daughters. I had plenty of exposure. I did not need, we had one. I said, look, please, I know I don't control the press, but please do something with this headshot. I don't need that. I don't want that. And please tap it down because, we don't need to do that. So that they switched his head out, put the dragon head in there. And again, this is with the work that we're doing to make change happen. So you would think that it was over, right? We win. Jerry Lewis is now the Senate. He's gonna run again. But check it out. That was November 2011. So what do we have in 2012? And in August, we have a primary. So Russell Pierce says, you know what? I'm gonna run from the primary. I'm gonna reclaim my seat. You all just waste your time because you beat me in a special election. You can't beat me in a Republican primary where Democrats don't vote and it's all Republicans. So there's no way. And so not only did he declare he's gonna run again, but he even did something more so. You all familiar with redistricting? Every 10 years redistrict. So Russell Pierce, remember I said he's very powerful. Guess what he did to the redistricting commission people you knew? He had them go in and redraw his district and cut out Jerry Lewis by 3 blocks. So now not only was he going to run again, his district became more conservative because the western part was more progressive. So now he's even more conservative, and Jerry Lewis can't run because he's not going to. Jerry Lewis has been in his house for over 20 years. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to move to run. So now he's got, all right, I'm good. I'm going to get back in there. I'm going to reclaim my throne and move forward. So again, so what do? I went out, raised some money. This guy gave us $40,000. I went out with my same Republican allies, and we said, you know what? We got to do this now at a primary that we have to draft another candidate. And so we came up with another candidate, white, male, Mormon, right? Mormon church, that's a big deal. Spanish speaking, loved immigrants. And you all remember this thing called Sky Mall? When you were in the airplane, there's a magazine, it'd be Sky Mall. There's before Amazon, remember that? This guy was the founder, Bob Worsley. So needless to say, he's a millionaire. So he decides, right? They get him to agree to do it. So now he's running against Russell Pierce, never ran for office. So now we're moving forward and we launched a strategy. Guess what we did? Because it was a very red district, we went to Democrats and said, look, let us register you as an independent and let us help you request a Republican ballot by mail. Then you can vote in the primary. And then when it gets to the general, you can vote for the Democrat. And because we had such a good relationship, over 500 Democrats did that. So we were able to turn out hundreds of voters for Bob Worsley. Again, not a pro-Worsley campaign, but an anti-Pierce campaign. And I didn't know to tell you, in the special recall election, we won by double digits. It was like 11 to 12, double digits, unheard of, right? That's a butt kick at double digits. And we ran that in primary. And I had never played myself in a primary. I had never played in Republican primaries. Are you kidding me? So we did this work, and look at the work. We drafted these folks up. We started picking up ballots again. And check this out, man. On election night, look at these results. On the left's the recall election results. On the right, check it out. We won by, again, over 2,700 votes. Almost identical, right? And the way this is such a powerful story because the left's the recall election. That's everyone in there. Democrats, that explains that. But check this out. In a Republican primary, to beat someone like Russell Pierce, who had never lost an election except for the recall by double digits, by another, that was just like amazing work that we did to make that happen. So that was the end of it. And so because of that work, y'all, not only did we shut down the anti-immigrant machine, but we permanently retired Russell Pierce as a politician. He was never able to come back. Never. Imagine that. Imagine taking one of the most powerful politicians and permanently retiring him because of the work we did as citizens. So that was the moment that we actually were able to breathe again because now he was done. And Bob Worsley continued in that seat until he was able to really cement what's taking place. So with that, I want to this is just who I am, what I've done, how you get a hold of me. This is the organization I run now, Organizing Institute for Democracy. But I know I share a lot. There's other stories I can share, but I wanted to be respectful of your time, but also just share a little bit and then see if there's any questions, right? I just think there's some powerful connections between what we're dealing with. And the last thing I'll say is we were dealing with this, right? People, again, from other states, from California, my friends, like, oh, Rand, look, you guys are kind of a joke. Look what's going on there. How can this happen in Arizona? And now it's like, how can this happen in the United States? So with that, Isaac, I'll turn it over to you to see if you want to facilitate some questions, conversations.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. That was incredible. And then if anybody does have any questions, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, or comments or anything
Yeah.
you want to know more about.
All right, here we go. So Randy, first question. This was great success. We're kind of in hot water everywhere right now. What are you doing at the moment?
Right now, I'm in the process of putting together a type of strategy we need to kind of make it happen. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing happen, and also I'm in the process, we're probably going to be relocating from Arizona to California. I'm in the process of trying to showcase in history what's worked in these types of situations. We're up against, a tyrant, you're up against, the military, but it's got to be nonviolence on a scale that we have not seen before, right? It can't be just reactive stuff, right? And I don't know if you're familiar, but the Longshoremen's Union, they went on strike within last year and they shut down ports and they got what they wanted. Upwards over 30%. And so, but the labor movement's not working together to really hold people accountable on the scale. The labor movement, because of the pilots and the flight attendants, they can shut down airports, they can shut down ports, they can start negotiating from a power base, but they're not doing it. So we have this piecemeal stuff, and we have people right now, what frustrates me, they're talking about the midterm elections. That's still too far away. And I say that because when Russell Pierce became president of the Senate, when I was having those conversations in January, that's what they're telling me. Oh, we'll just wait till 2012. I'm like, you can't wait Russell Pierce out. So that's the problem I'm having. Politicians have not reset. Donald Trump is not waiting. We might even have midterms. It depends on what they do, right? You have a court that refuses to hold them accountable. You have a Congress who refuses to exercise their power. So my concern is I'm trying to get in the room with other power brokers saying, look, we have to have a whole different strategy. And unfortunately, we're not thinking that level. Doing a rally is not enough. Like, for example, I'll give you one example. Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez came here, they flew in, and within an hour and a half, they flew out. Doesn't do anything. In other words, when you gather people, you got to take them into action. They got to march somewhere. They got to sit down. They got to do something. You can't just give rallies. You can't just be on tours, right? You gotta get in there, and you have to have some risk and sacrifice. Without risk and sacrifice, there'll be no change in the United States. People had a risk and sacrifice to get the right to vote. They had a risk and sacrifice for women to get the right to vote. They had a risk and sacrifice to end slavery, to end segregation. That doesn't happen just because you're right. And I think what I want people to learn, the mere presence of injustice does not mean change will happen. That's not enough. You got to cultivate the constituency that will take that on and make something happen. And everyone has a different threshold for injustice. So right now, people are really thinking, oh, that's unfortunate, but they're still not really paying attention to what's happening. You have militia groups going around bringing in unarmed Latinos, immigrant workers, because they're getting away with it. You had a U.S. senator in a secured federal building forced to his knees and handcuffed. That is just unheard of, right? And so these are situations we're going to have to do it. So I don't think we've risen to the moment what the strategy is yet. So I hope I kind of answered your question, but I'm happy to do a follow-up.
Okay, let me ask you on a different level. You were successful with turning over this person in the Arizona Senate. That said, with this big movement happening in the country that's building and building and building, should they have your unified message was to have another election? What do you think? Your opinion would be would the unifying message at this point be the 25th Amendment?
All I can tell you, this is my problem, what's happening. If all I did for the recall did an action on a Saturday, we never would have won. This whole notion of doing these convenient marches on Saturdays and then everyone going home and waiting for 3 more, it's not a strategy to win. It's called washing your soul. It's called feel good stuff. We really got to be doing things Monday through Friday. We have to shut things down. We have to be a clog. We have to be willing to get arrested, not just 1 or 2 people. I don't want to be a martyr. We have to get people to move. Unless we do that, nothing's going to change, right? And so it's not about having the right. It's like, can we get people to engage in that, right? I mean, look what Gandhi did in India, right? It took time, but they had to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people, right? And people were killed. The civil rights movement, people were killed, right? We can't even think about. Part of my fear right now is we have one of the most armed citizenry in the world. People sitting on masses of guns, right? What are they going to do? We start doing things, right? So I just feel like we have not even started to really put what this is in the category of risk and sacrifice what's needed to get that change done, right? We're still into, and I'll criticize, the Democratic Party would just put out press releases against Russell Pierce. I'm like, who gives a shit about a press release? Right? I don't care what Schumer says. What's he going to do, right? We have a strategy that's so disconnected from what's necessary, right? They should be out leading mass protests, during the week, surrounding federal courthouse, surrounding, detention centers, having people come out, set up camps. I mean, we're just not doing it. We're not there yet. And so maybe I don't know what's going to take. I know for each person, it's an individual journey, right? I didn't get to be politicized on my own. Someone had to cross me over, right? So we have to have conversations with fellow citizens, right? To say, hey, we got to get you involved. We got to get you engaged, right? No one gets there on their own. And I think that's kind of the thing we're struggling with, right? It's not a matter of what's the right message, like what's people's tolerance for injustice, right? The brother's broken so many rules already. There's plenty there, but it's like what's and you all know democracy only works if people are educated and know what's taking place. If we have people who don't even understand it, right? We have people who can't even name who's on the Supreme Court, let alone who the representative is, right? So this is the fundamental breakdown, right? And so we have a minority of people out there moving. We just got to get more bold in our actions and be more consistent. And the last thing I hope Democrats learn from this is like, how timid have we been when we've had the power? I want to throw up when I think about Barack Obama being in the White House and we had to control everything, and we didn't get immigration reform because he refused to push it. And all he wanted was the Affordable Care Act, and he didn't want to do immigration reform. Look what Donald Trump has done in 4 or 5 months. I don't agree with that stuff, but like I'm looking for like who would be willing to do that on our side. In the 90s, I was around when Newt Gingrich did the shit he did in Congress. I'm like, I want a Newt Gingrich on our side. Who's our Newt Gingrich? I didn't agree with what he was doing, but can we fight like that? We need people like that, right? We need people that will fight like that. And so that's my frustration. So I don't know. I'm in the process of figuring that out, but my base of power and strength is more in California. So I'm looking forward to that move. So I can start tapping into that to start, seeing what we could do. But thank you for your question.
I have a question for you. We're now facing these massive misinformation and disinformation campaigns. And a lot of times when we talk to people, they are so dug in because they believe things that are completely incorrect.
Right.
Do you have suggestions on getting around that?
Well, it depends. Let me just kind of give my framework for organizing. It's first of all, is that what's the change I want? Once I'm clear on that, then what's the change? Then I ask myself, who or what do I need to make that happen? So if I'm talking to a certain person or leader and I need them because of the power they have and the people they can bring together to make that happen, then I got to engage them. And so when they claim to certain things, I got to agitate them. Like, tell me more about that. Oh, so tell me more about that. Where did you learn that? Versus being judgmental, right? There's nothing worse than repelling people than being very judgmental, claiming you know something and forcing people, why don't you think this way, right? So that's the first thing I do. I do that analysis because part of change is you got to build a new constituency to create a different outcome. And that's the part that people skip a lot. The status quo, as things are moving, is baked into the system. And so to change that, right, you got to create a new constituency, and that's hard work. That's hard work. And so you got to move people. So that's what I would say. The people you're engaging, the question, do you need them to build the power you need to win? And if you do so, then you have to really have to walk them through that and then draw them out more, help them explain this, and then say things like, what would it take for you to think something different? What would it take for you to do something? How bad would it have to be? So they're allowed to define it versus you defining it for them. That's what I had to do when I started organizing different folks. I leave them agitated, start questioning things without them thinking I'm judging them or saying, you voted for so-and-so, are you an idiot? I mean, that's not going to get you very far. So that's what you have to engage them in different ways if you need them to win. And sometimes you have to go back at them and say, all right, let's pick this up another time. And you got to keep coming back at them if you need them, right? If you're going to need to really engage them. But part of the process is like what we learned some of the Democrats we spoke to in Russell Pierce's district, because it was a safe red seat, the Democratic Party had never spoken to them, never engaged them. And here we were knocking on the door 2 or 3 times, say, hey, you're important. We need your vote. Can you do this? That hadn't been done. So I know that's happening all over the country. Certain people are not getting spoken to except for a few weeks out from an election. So it's just a lot of work that has to happen. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party is not suited up to do that work. The Democratic Party is into getting people elected. They're not interested in building how we will build real power. And that's the big difference.
All right. Well, thank you for that. If we do not have any questions, then we can end here. And then if anybody does have one, feel free to speak up now. Or you can always, I think Mr. Parraz put his email on the last slide.
Yeah.
So feel free to email him there. And this recording will be posted. Feel free to reach out to us if you are interested in watching again or
Yeah.
want to share it or anything.
Yep, I'm
Uh,
happy to, yep, I'm sorry, Isaac. I'm happy to hear like any thoughts or comments you have, feel free to send them to me. Always curious with people when they hear the story, what they think and how it impacts, their sense of what's possible.
I'm definitely with that. So many different thoughts and so much good we can do. Well, Mr. Parras, thank you so much for joining us tonight or this evening, for some of us. And we hope to see everyone again sometime soon.